The Raiders may have just found the missing piece that could completely change their offense in 2026, and the name now gaining serious attention is Brian Thomas Jr. Las Vegas needs a true long-term weapon for its young quarterback, and a new trade report has put Thomas right back into the conversation. But there is a major reason this deal would be extremely difficult to pull off. Jacksonville has already turned down significant offers for the young receiver. So why is Brian Thomas Jr. suddenly such an interesting name for the Raiders? And could Las Vegas actually convince Jacksonville to give him up? Let's break down the three biggest storylines surrounding the Raiders right now. Chapter 1. The WR1 Raiders could be chasing. If you watch the Raiders closely, you already know the problem. Las Vegas needs more explosive talent at wide receiver. The team has young players who are still trying to establish themselves, but nobody has completely locked down the role of a long-term, unquestioned WR1. That is exactly why Brian Thomas Jr. makes so much sense. Thomas exploded onto the NFL scene as a rookie, finishing his first season with 82 catches, 1,282 yards and 10 touchdowns. His 2025 season was much quieter, with 48 receptions for 707 yards and 2 touchdowns. That drop in production is important. Not because it proves Thomas is a bad player, it doesn't. Instead, it could be the reason another team might even have a chance to acquire him. Recent reports say Jacksonville rejected multiple significant trade offers for Thomas, including offers before the 2025 trade deadline. That tells you something very important. The Jaguars are not simply giving him away. But the Raiders have a reason to keep watching. Fernando Mendoza is now part of the future in Las Vegas after being selected number 1 overall in the 2026 NFL Draft. He is still developing, and surrounding him with explosive weapons could be one of the fastest ways to help him grow. Imagine the possibilities. Brian Thomas Jr. stretching defenses vertically. Brock Bowers attacking the middle. A revamped offensive line giving the quarterback more time. And Clint Kubiak building an offense around all of it. That is a completely different situation for a young quarterback. And there is another reason this rumor will not disappear. Jacksonville has several talented players competing for touches, including Thomas, Parker Washington, Jacoby Meyers, and Travis Hunter. Hunter, of course, is not someone you would expect Jacksonville to casually move after selecting him number 2 overall in the 2025 draft. So if the Jaguars ever decide they cannot keep everyone long-term, Thomas becomes an obvious name for other teams to monitor. But here's the catch. The Raiders would probably have to pay a serious price. Jacksonville has already shown that it is willing to say no. So this is not a simple Raiders trade for Brian Thomas Jr. story. It is a potential blockbuster that would require Las Vegas to convince Jacksonville that the return is worth losing a young receiver with proven explosive ability. And if that trade never happens, the Raiders still have 2 other major problems they have to solve. Because the next one involves a player who may already be losing ground in a critical position battle. Chapter TWO. Jackson Powers Johnson's timing couldn't be worse. Jackson Powers Johnson did not need another obstacle. The Raiders' right guard competition was already getting intense, with Powers Johnson battling Caleb Rogers for the starting job. Then came Monday. Powers Johnson left practice early after suffering an undisclosed injury, and the timing immediately became a concern because he is fighting for an important role on a revamped offensive line. The good news. There is no indication right now that this is a major long-term injury. That is the part Raiders fans need to remember. Nobody should treat one preseason injury as proof that Powers Johnson cannot stay healthy or cannot be a starter. But the NFL does not wait for anybody. Every missed practice gives another player an opportunity. And that player is Caleb Rogers. If Rogers performs well while Powers Johnson is sidelined, the coaching staff suddenly has a much tougher decision to make. That is what makes this situation so important. Powers Johnson needs representatives. He needs to show the coaching staff that he can handle the job. He needs to build chemistry with the rest of the line. Instead, he is now dealing with an injury at exactly the wrong time. And there is another layer to this. The Raiders spent this off-season trying to improve an offensive line that was one of the biggest problems on the team last year. The addition of Tyler Linderbaum, the return of Colton Miller, and the new offensive system are all supposed to give this offense a much stronger foundation. That matters even more because Fernando Mendoza is developing behind this line. A young quarterback needs protection. He needs time. He needs a running game that can keep defenses honest. If the offensive line starts breaking down again, it puts pressure on every other part of the offense. So the Raiders absolutely need Powers Johnson healthy. But they also need Rogers ready. And that brings us to the biggest problem from the Raiders' preseason opener, one that followed them into Houston. Chapter 3. The run defense is still a problem, let's be honest. This is the issue Raiders fans should be watching very closely. The run defense struggled against Arizona in the preseason opener, and the Houston joint practice provided another reminder that Las Vegas still has work to do. Arizona ran for 156 yards against the Raiders and averaged 4.3 yards per carry. That is not the kind of performance you want to see from a defense trying to take a major step forward. Then came Houston. The Texans' running game had success during the joint practice, with David Montgomery producing a strong performance behind an offensive line that consistently created room. And that is where the concern comes in. If opponents can run the football efficiently, everything becomes harder. Second and long disappears. Third and manageable becomes common. Play action becomes more dangerous. And suddenly the defense is spending the entire game reacting instead of attacking. That cannot become a weekly pattern. There were still positives from the Houston practice. The Raiders' defense created 2 takeaways, and there were signs of improvement in communication and pressure. But the bigger picture is simple. The Raiders need to become tougher against the run. They need the defensive line to hold its ground. They need linebackers to attack gaps faster. And they need everyone communicating before the snap and reacting together after it. The encouraging part is that this is still preseason. The Raiders have time to fix it. Their joint practice against Houston was also a major measuring stick opportunity against a strong opponent, and the team is still learning a new defensive system. So nobody should panic because of one practice. But ignoring the problem would be a disaster. The Raiders have to find answers before week 1. And that brings us to the big question. Which problem matters most? Is it finding a true WR1 like Brian Thomas Jr.? Is it getting Jackson Powers-Johnson healthy and settled at right guard? Or is fixing the run defense the most urgent task of all? Because honestly, every one of these issues could affect the Raiders in 2026. A Brian Thomas Jr. trade could give Fernando Mendoza an explosive target and potentially transform the passing game. A healthy Powers-Johnson could strengthen the offensive line and give the young quarterback better protection. And a stronger run defense could prevent opponents from controlling games against Las Vegas. But if I had to pick the most urgent issue right now, it would be the defense. You can survive a receiver competition. You can survive a preseason offensive line injury. What you cannot afford is a defense that allows opponents to run the football whenever they want. And now I want to hear from Raider Nation. Comment challenge. If you could make only one move before week 1, would you trade for Brian Thomas Jr., keep Jackson Powers-Johnson as the starting guard, or completely focus on fixing the run defense? Pick one. Don't give me all 3. Drop your choice in the comments and tell me why. Because the Raiders are entering one of the most important stretches of training camp, and every practice is going to reveal something new. The team already has its quarterback of the future in Fernando Mendoza. The offensive line is being rebuilt. The defense is learning a new system. And the front office still has the flexibility to explore opportunities around the league. But whether the Raiders actually make another major move remains to be seen. One thing is certain. Brian Thomas Jr. is not a simple rumor that can be ignored. Jacksonville has already rejected serious offers, and that means any team trying to acquire him would have to make a very convincing offer. At the same time, the Raiders have to monitor Powers-Johnson's injury and make sure the right guard competition does not turn into another offensive line problem. And defensively, the run game has to improve. There is still time. The Raiders' second preseason game against Houston is scheduled for August 20th, followed by their preseason finale against San Francisco on August 27th. The roster must then be reduced from 90 players to 53 by August 30th. That means the clock is officially ticking. The Raiders are not finished building this team. And if John Spytek decides there is a player out there who can dramatically change the offense, don't be surprised if Las Vegas keeps making calls. For now, the biggest question is whether Brian Thomas Jr. stays in Jacksonville, or whether the Raiders eventually decide that the price is worth paying. And if that happens, the entire outlook of this offense could change overnight.